the things I've noticed with the private energy efficiency programs, a lot of businesses want a 2-year payback period.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you're doing with to encourage private businesses to make energy efficiency investments that they might not otherwise make? Are some of your programs aimed at that?
Yeah, look, they are. And I think there's two ways there's a couple of ways to address that. The Better Buildings Partnership, a lot of those companies have been doing programs, and they're probably looking at slightly longer paybacks than 2 to 3 years. And the reason for that is that you had new development coming in, and we had Green Star. So there's a whole bunch of factors that contribute to this, right? So one of them is that we have a Green Building Council that's been in Sydney or been in Australia for 10 years. Actually, previously used to work there before I joined council, but they develop Green Star tools, and those Green Star tools have been the benchmark for design ratings of new buildings. And so you've seen these new buildings come into the city, they set a new benchmark and therefore drive the existing building owners to upgrade their existing buildings because they still want to compete. We have a high level of institutional ownership of our buildings in the city, as you saw, so 14 players own 60%. So there's very strong competition. So we have a smaller industry, which means they compete more. Green Building Council put out some great data to show that the cost of green buildings, for a 4, 5, 6 star, you've got about a 2, a 4 and a 8% premium to do that. And because over time you built up this expertise, those paybacks are coming back much more. So yeah, very strong competition, which forces companies to take longer paybacks because they need to compete with their peers. That's one reason, right? The other side of things is the environmental upgrade agreements. That is a low-cost finance option to allow some of these things to happen, retrofitting of the existing buildings. And it looks like they're being taken up in two kind of ways. One is just purely for the second-tier building owners who may not be able to get it financed any other way. They don't really have a good line of credit and those kind of things, so they can get it through this mechanism a lot more strongly. The second is with the more leading owners is that they might take partial financing through an EUA for the high risk component of a 5-year payback, bringing that back to about a 3-year payback or a 2-year payback. So they mix that up to get a better payback on those buildings. So, and then I suppose the third part of that is the Better Buildings Partnership. There's nothing quite as powerful as having all those CEOs and the how do I say this nicely? Maybe the egos, the competitiveness of that go with it. Having them in a room and having one of them sort of being able to say, well, I've done this and I've done that, or we're leading, and it's a very competitive environment. And especially so we've got them to commit to things they probably wouldn't have committed to otherwise. Yeah. And so you've got to do this push-pull kind of thing. And from the planning perspective, we did a bit of analysis the other day. Looking at new buildings, and out of the building types that can be rated under Green Star is really only supposed to apply to about 25%, the top 25%. We're getting about 90% of buildings being rated under Green Star, which is a really, really great outcome. And that's because we've got this perfect storm of really good rating tools, a well-informed industry, high institutional ownership, Better Buildings Partnership. You've got to have, I suppose the answer is that there's no one thing. You've got to have all these things in place, and they all slowly, you get a bit of traction on one, and then that goes quiet because you push that as far as you can, then you bring this one up, and you just got to keep working on all streams.
Yeah. Thank you.
Michelle from SCI.
Sorry.
I think you've got very comprehensive strategies in place to achieve a sustainable vision in Sydney. Could you share insights on the technology roadmap, because we wanted to understand, how all this thing get started, and also what were some of the challenges, and what are some of the systems or innovations actually, Sydney, used to, create a more smart, network city. Yeah.
Technologies, okay. Thinking about commercial buildings is probably the first place, and look. There's the basic lighting upgrades. T5 lights, and what you've got here, T5 lights. Lighting's a really easy one, and the other thing that's also in place, another mechanism, is the federal government implemented mandatory reporting of energy efficiency at point of sale. So any building or tenancy above 2,000 square metres has to disclose their neighbour's energy rating of that space at point of sale. And so that really has also weeded out a lot of probably the non-performers, because when they advertise their space in the paper, they have to have the energy rating of that space in that ad. It's legally required. So that's another mechanism that's driving the marketplace as well. So get back to your question of technology. So lighting is a very important one, and I say that mechanism is important because even tenancies have to advertise their neighbour's rating, and lighting is a very important one. So there's watts per square metre kind of targets for that. So lighting is a big one. Variable speed drives in buildings, looking at the ventilation and the control systems in the building, insulation. Look, there's a whole suite of technologies. It's probably not worth going into too much detail today, but look, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in there, and I suppose what I've seen with like companies like Investor and GPT, they're probably the two leading companies in Sydney. What they do is their business model is they buy really old, badly performing buildings. The first thing they do before they even put in any technology is they just litter the place with meters. So they might go and put in 50, 60 energy meters in a commercial building, monitoring the lifts, monitoring the lighting, monitoring monitoring all that stuff, and they start to really understand the building. And first of all, that gives them an ability to control the building much better with the existing kit that's in there. It allows them to understand what are the really technology easy hit issues, so variable speed drives and those kind of things. And then they'll implement a few of those, and then they can keep monitoring going forward. And so they're seeing sort of 50 to 60% reductions in energy consumption in these buildings through very little capital intensive kind of, it's probably 5 years worth of work that they do before they get to something that's really quite lumpy, like upgrading the chillers or something like that, a couple of $1 million project, which is expensive. So there's a lot of things you can do before you get to that kind of milestone, that sort of 1 in 15 year project that happens when they replace the chillers. Sorry, does that answer your question a bit? Or I suppose there's that, but also LED lighting as well in the public domain. That's a really, that's another one we've been pushing, and I should say there's many other C40 cities, because we're part of the C40 that have done LED lighting. San Francisco is a great example of that. Other Scandinavian sort of cities as well.
Actually, I was more referring to the technology roadmap.
Ah, right.
Yeah, for Sydney, how the government manage, the entire the process, strengthening maybe surveillance, leveraging on smart, systems. Moving up environmental monitoring. Yeah,
environmental monitoring.
Yes.
It probably hasn't been as big a focus as sort of setting the goals and letting the industry kind of come up to meet those goals. We do have a very strong building and compliance section, and they do a lot of, in terms of technology, we don't do a lot of online monitoring per se, but we are moving quite strongly into handheld technology for doing a lot of the building assessments and those kind of things. So taking photos, having all that electronically based, also building and maintenance of council-owned assets as well, so we can push all that back into a database. So we have an asset database. We also have the floor space sensors as well, and all that information is used as a database to then generate the forward plans of what technology we need in the future. But I know I haven't answered your question fully, but it's probably not a focus, and that's probably why I can't answer it as strongly as you might.
Hi, my name is Bala. I'm the National Academy. I have a couple of questions for you, but my questions will be aligned more from a government's perspective. The first question is, we all know that the Sydney 2030 vision is such a massive one that involves a lot of planning and a lot of follow-up throughout the years as well. How important do you think is having a very good institutional support from within the staff of City Council itself? And from your presentation, we do notice that there has been a lot of modelling work, planning work going on. How does the City Council get the buy-in of its internal staff and also to develop the expertise in that area? Because you did mention this point that the City Council actually steered away from the non-traditional roles and ventured into new areas which were not familiar. So how do you bring up the capabilities of your internal staff? That is question number one. Number two is about behavioral change. One point you mentioned that the 10-year drought did cause an impact on people's water consumption behavior, and it still remains so despite coming out of the drought. But moving forward in terms of energy, has the City Council done any previous works in terms of changing people's behavior in a massive scale? The third question is, I wanted to ask about political risk, because you did mention that the gas prices might go up because of the export component, and raising prices of utilities or essential items always involves a political risk, right? And that you did answer that your Lord Mayor was re-elected with a much bigger majority. Maybe it's the Australian people's mindset and culture. So yeah, these are the three areas I want to get your opinion.
Okay, the first one, which was about the capacity in the council. So back in 2006, the development of 2030 was about developing a vision for the city. It wasn't about developing a vision for the council. It was asking the community what they want in their city. It was their vision, and we I suppose going back to the original question up here in the far right corner, one of the mechanisms we used in that was to show them demonstrations or projects or pictures of other cities, because we wanted people to broaden their minds, because really, at the end of the day, Sydney's a fairly wealthy city, and we really could turn Sydney into anything we wanted it to be. So what kind of a city do you want was the question we asked them, essentially, and we had a whole bunch of examples from the world, and that allowed them to draw out and bring that vision together. Once that vision was endorsed, I think, hats off to the CEO. She really turned her attention to sort of saying, okay, that's a very, very big vision and a very different from business as usual for council, and therefore what kind of an organisation do we need in order to deliver that outcome? And so there was I suppose a phase of, okay, well, how does each business unit relate to that vision? What's our role in delivering that overall vision? And there was probably a year of really busy work with a lot of the senior managers were all bringing up projects, and really there was quite difficult to prioritise, because as you saw, 2030 is really broad and everyone was excited and putting in loads of projects. Over time that distilled itself and we got some priority kind of things happening. But one of the things that the CEO realised was that we needed much greater capability in our senior managers. So we needed them to be, better people managers. We needed to be better public speakers. We needed them to be, a certain skill set. So there was a suite of training courses that were then developed internally within the organisation. We also set up senior management workshops. So every quarter, there's about 40 or 50 of us, 60 senior managers, and we'd go to these workshops. There'd be one-day workshops. The CEO would talk, the Lord Mayor would be there as well, and then there'd be some sort of capacity building for us as senior managers as well. So she's implemented a program to build that capacity in the organisation. Now we're getting into the real nitty-gritty where some of these big projects have really taken off. So a good example, right at this point in time, or actually just about a month ago, we got the state government to commit to light rail on George Street, which is the major spine north-south in the city, and that's a major transport outcome and one of the big outcomes of 2030, because we said there should be 3 squares in the city, one down at Central Station, one in the centre of the city, and one at the northern end at Circular Quay next to the harbour, linked via light rail scheme. And so we feel, I suppose that's fantastic that we've had that endorsed, that strategy, and now the state government's committed to delivering that, because they run the transport, not us. And so what you're seeing now is a huge prioritisation process, because that's taking a lot of funds and a lot of money, and also we've got Green Square down the southern area, which is a major redevelopment. So we're going through a major prioritisation and therefore much stronger project management. There's a project management office that's been set up. We have a governance structure around where we spend our money, risk assessments, engagement strategies and everything with the whole project. So there's been lots of systems developed. I suppose that's the side, that's systems. There's been capacity in the people developed, and there's been a lot of focus now on financial management and how we actually spend our money to deliver those outcomes. So it's a process. And so I feel, I work for a much more capable organisation than I did 5 years ago. And it's a really good thing. It's really good in terms of the organisation. your second question was on energy efficiency, I think, yeah?
Energy efficiency and related behavioral change.
Yeah, okay. So energy efficiency, we've done a lot of analysis on the behaviour sort of side of that, and what we found is that, I'll just highlight a couple of factors. One is, the closer you move to the centre of the city, the greener people want to be, which is a really interesting kind of outcome. Because I think people who live on the fringes of the city have lots of greenery around them, lots of natural environment, and they feel like they're in a greener environment. Well, they are. I mean, when you get into the centre of the city, it's very congested. There's a lot of noise, traffic, all that sort of thing, and so people almost have this desire to offset, I think, what that environment with some sort of green. So we're seeing a huge pushing in roof gardens and that kind of thing as well. But so it's good. We work with a fairly committed bunch of people in the inner city around green issues, so that's good. So we start from a good engagement base. Second thing we found is when we started to do some analysis of different groups, we found this momentum effect. So organisations and people, if you had a spectrum of, say, environmental actions that you do just to save money, that's probably the first step. The second step is probably conscious consumption, and then the third step is probably around actively offsetting the impacts of your life, so being carbon neutral and driving an electric car and those kind of things. So what we found is once you get people going on that journey, they actually, once they've undertaken one action, they want to do another action. Once they've undertaken 2 actions, they want to do 4 actions, and so you get this momentum effect. So the trick really is with a lot of our programs, and not everyone's always at the same stage, but you need to get them on that journey. So, and especially in this environment where the issue of environment has probably dropped down the agenda in terms of people's priorities since 5 years ago in Sydney. We always go in with the angle around cost effectiveness as that's the first cornerstone. So get them to save money, time, efficiency, and then once you get them on that journey, then they start to get some wins, they start to understand the issues, and then you can have a more informed conversation about the next stage, which is about the consumption. So what are they doing with their procurement policies, where are they buying their electricity from? It might cost a little bit, but they might get some branding out of it. So there's also some still cost benefit, but probably less tangible cost benefit. And then once you've got them in that journey, then that last bit, that depends on the kind of organisation and where they want to go. So that's the kind of model we use with our programs, and our programs focus at different sectors at different stages in that phase. Yeah, and that change. The third thing was
Political risk.
political risk. The Lord Mayor was elected based on a green agenda. So being re-elected is a reaffirmation of that. So that's tick number 1. So that gives her the courage to make further commitments. In terms of political risk, that's totally up to her. Our job as officers in the council is to provide the information, the suite of strategies. You push that up into the office of the Lord Mayor, they determine ultimately what goes forward and what doesn't. And sometimes it's timing, so yes, okay, we'll do that, but just not right now. And other times it's looked at just wouldn't fly politically. And you just, as officers, I know, sometimes that's hard to accept, but you've just got to do it. That's the environment you're in. Yeah, and I suppose that's why I say we have got a lot of success, because we do have a committed Lord Mayor. So it was a very, I've been quite frank today in a few questions, but look, as a person working in the environment field for a number of years, this was quite a change of environment when I worked compared to other places, because when I put projects up in the organisation, especially a couple of years ago, they just got accepted. So you have to be very careful what you wish for, because you probably will get it. and that means the responsibility comes back to you. So you've got to really ground all your programs and your projects based on really good analysis and be confident with that. Political environment's getting a little tougher now. But look, we've still got a lot of momentum, and we're using that to push through some of these projects. And the economics of these things are getting much, much better as well. So, yeah, thank you. Question?
Your council is carbon neutral.
Yep.
That means zero carbon emission.
Yep.
How do you achieve it? Buy 100% renewable or buy carbon credits?
We buy carbon credits. So we have a utilities information management system which monitors all the energy use across council. We'd also put that together, and so that's what I suppose we started 5 years ago, really with a back of the envelope kind of waterfall chart. We've now gone through and we're deep diving into each of those issues, and the numbers are starting to sort of show that that deficit that was 17% has now been reduced to 4%, and I think the next version of this you'll probably see it go below, and we'll get even further than the target as well. So the point is, unless you ever put that target out there, you don't do the work to see if you can achieve it. So you've got to base your target on what you need to achieve, not what you think is actually possible at the time. And that's really one of the secrets of how we've been able to do as much work as we can. Is we had a Lord Mayor and a CEO who were extremely committed to this, and they really had I suppose the commitment, the courage to make those kind of commitments in the public domain and at the right time. And finally, greening our own operations. Look, you can't really be pushing these kind of strategies, this kind of vision, unless you really got your own house in order. Absolutely number one, every government department should be, they're the ones who should be committing to those green buildings to facilitate that green building market happening. They're the ones who should be leading by example. So this is the profile of the energy use within our own property portfolio. We have about 225 buildings, about $3.5 billion worth. We're about 40,000 or 45,000 tonnes of CO2 across our portfolio, and most of that is used in commercial buildings, and then the other third is street lights. And this picture here, if you're wondering, this is actually Lady Gaga using energy in the town hall. So just an excuse to have that picture. Yeah, she's not using water this time, but look, this is the water profile. So we've got parks this time. Buildings also use a lot of water, and but this time the park's the big other user at 37% there. So as we talked about in the introduction, we are a carbon neutral council, and we started out, I suppose this is worth telling, we started out probably 6 or 7 years ago. The council wanted to be green, and we really kind of started from a low base, and so they said, what can we do now to at least get us started, because we know these projects are going to take years to kind of push forward. So the council made a commitment to buy green power for all our electricity. Green power is very expensive in the city, and so we did that for a number of years, but the accountants started looking at that cost going, that's a very big cost we're putting out every year. And so we actually changed our strategy, which is for that reason, for cost, but also for another a leadership position as well. So instead of buying green power, we then converted 5 or 6 years worth of that budget into a capital budget, and we've started to put renewable energy on our own buildings. And the reason for that is because we're a government entity, we own our buildings for a very long time. And so a 10-year payback on a PD system is not really a huge issue for us. We can afford to do that because those cells are going to be sitting there for 25, 30, 40 years, and after that sort of 10-year payback, you're going to be getting free energy. So we've converted that into a renewable energy fund, a $12 million renewable energy fund. I think I've got a slide on that in a minute. But the other part to this was that there was a new federal government standard called the National Carbon Offset Standard. And really, it's great for us to say that we're carbon neutral, but we really needed some external verification of that. And so we were the first council to go through that, or first government agency in the whole of Australia to go through that process and gain that certification. And so we also have our own waterfall chart, and because we are asking the community to achieve 70%, we set the same target for ourselves. 70% reduction by 2030, whole suite of actions here. We were doing quite well in terms of energy efficiency for our portfolio until the council has decided to buy a few new buildings, which kind of put things out of whack there by 3 or 4%. But our targets are absolute. They're not intensity targets, they're absolute targets. And you can see here 2012 emissions was, the target was 20% reduction. So that was like an interim target. We achieved 26%. So we did meet that target, which is great. And we're continuing to roll out a suite of actions. And so I've just got a few slides on some of these actions, but the usual things you'd expect: energy efficiency, LED lights in our street lighting portfolio, and also fleet actions as well as local generation through solar and also through trigeneration. So our properties portfolio, 48% is the target for reduction. We're probably at about 40, 42, 44. But because of that new building we're building, or we bought, it's probably come down a little bit from that, but we need to come back and see how we can achieve 48% overall. LED lighting, we are quite different to many other councils. We own about 40% of our street lights. Most of the other councils in Sydney, their street lights are owned by the energy utility. And so this gave us a mechanism to lead by example. So we are converting and have almost completed the conversion of all of our street lights. I think that's about 8 or 9,000 street lights with LED street lights, reducing the consumption by about 40 to 50%. So that's been quite a successful program, and really we're using that as a catalyst to get the energy network owners to convert the lights in the other councils and the rest of our lights as well. And this is, I suppose, one of those kind of examples where you've got good leadership within the council, in the Lord Mayor and the CEO. We do have good funding because we're a central business district council, and we use that position then to take these kind of positions, because if we didn't do this, the energy network retailer would have been sitting back waiting to the last minute until they absolutely have to do this, because they make money out of selling us electricity to power the street lights. So there's no incentive for the energy network owner to do this kind of project, but obviously there is an incentive for us. So we are getting good traction on this, and the network owner is now looking at how it goes about to retrofit the other hundreds of thousands of lights across Australia. This is the renewable energy fund that I talked about. We've got $12 million in there. At the moment, phase one is about $4.5 million, about 1.8 megawatts. And we chose 30 buildings, and that was out of the 225, and that was really based on having a suitable roof area, and also the buildings which had a higher energy use, because if we export the PV energy off that site, we end up pushing that into the wholesale electricity market, and we get a very low price for it, and therefore the value of the project goes down. So in order to keep the paybacks up, you put the PV on the buildings where the energy is being used. But that's one of the regulatory barriers we've identified, and we continue to lobby and work with the state government to try and get those barriers removed. And I suppose the other way we're getting around it too is that we're engaging an organisation who, a metering agent or an energy retailer, who can put meters on these buildings. And so if we overproduce on one building, we can take that energy use off the bill of another building that doesn't have PV on it, and all we pay is a distribution usage system charge. So that has more value than getting the wholesale price, but it still doesn't give the true value of the energy, and that's really what PV is about. We really need to get to. Tri-generation, and we are looking to install that in our own buildings, and with our own buildings, use them as the catalyst for the networks. So if we're going to be installing Tri-gen at Town Hall, in our commercial building, in our main Town Hall there on the left-hand side, we could oversize that and use that as the starting of a network to put in insulated hot water pipes to the surrounding buildings, which you can see there, some of which we own, some of which are commercially owned, and actually start the seeding that network, actually building that network out over time. We also have all of our fleet. We have Priuses for all our pool vehicles. They've now been all converted to, well, majority of them converted to electric vehicles as well. This is an interesting one because the electric vehicles don't actually save us any greenhouse compared to the Priuses. The Priuses were doing pretty good, and these, because our grid is so bad, don't actually save us much electricity. But what we have done is increase the amount of PV that we put in our own buildings, which can then offset the electricity consumption of these cars. So I think the electric vehicle is the way to go, but you just got to be making sure that you've got the renewable electricity to drive them and make sure that therefore they're low emissions. And they, look, they're quiet, so there's a noise impact, and then also they have lower emissions in the city, so better for air quality as well in the city. I just wanted to briefly talk about climate change. I've just got a few more minutes before 11 o'clock. So that's sort of all the green infrastructure side of things, but also, look, we've got to be really quite honest about the impacts of climate change going forward. We've got climate change scenarios of, I think, 40 centimetres by 2050 and 90 centimetres by 2100 in terms of sea level rise in Sydney. And we've also done some climate change adaptation or vulnerability mapping across the city. And the circle there is obviously our city of Sydney LGA. The two big issues that we found, bushfire is not an issue for us, of course. We're in the middle of the city. But one of the issues for us is heat island impact. So yes, you've got heat stress on and that's got a physiological impact on especially the older and the more vulnerable parts of the population. But also for every degree increase in the local area, we'll probably see an 8.5–10% increase in peak energy use as well. And that's a really big issue also economically, because we have just gone through a huge phase of investment in New South Wales. I think it's $12.5 billion in energy network upgrades, and that's because of peak energy demand rising because of air conditioning loads being increased. And so it was an interesting conversation here that you've got a hell of a lot of residential that traditionally has been naturally ventilated. It'll be really interesting to see as economic prosperity increases over the years, whether people will go in and then retrofit those with air conditioning, and you'll go through maybe a similar scenario to what we have, where that peak energy demand goes up. And actually what's happened in the last couple of years is the average energy consumption has come down because of energy efficiency. So you actually end up having to pay more for your electricity because you've got more asset there but less electricity going through the network. So big issue economically and environmentally, of course, then too, because the greenhouse associated with all that energy use. We've also done aerial mapping. This is a heat island impact map of the city at, I think it's either 10 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock at night. And you can see the radiating heat from the different areas of the city. The roadway, of course, black asphalt is always probably the worst part of that, and so you get a lot of heat gain from that. But I've seen some really interesting models of this, not to use us as a case study, but in Hamburg in Germany, they actually use this, and you can type in your address on a website, go down to your house, and if your house is radiating heat because it's coloured red in this, that makes you eligible for an insulation rebate, and therefore you can get insulation put in your house. So, this is the kind of thing with really good data, and that you can really get some great programs going. We're not there yet, but we're on that path. And taking a leaf out of your book, we are really pushing for the canopy coverage targets across the city, and this is a really major way of reducing the heat island impact in the city. And also, it's just a good thing to do. It's good for livability in the city, good for the housing prices in streets where there are beautiful big trees is always more valuable than the streets where they're not. So there's an economic driver, there's a livability driver, there's a climate change adaptation driver, and a peak energy demand driver. So there's a lot of reasons why we want to green up the city. And so we have set canopy coverage targets now for the city. Not as ambitious as yours, but getting fairly close. So these were the 10 directions that I talked about in Sustainable Sydney 2030 before. We've really just today concentrated on the leading environmental performance section, so the green part of that. If you want to know more, go to the website. There's a Sustainable Sydney 20 website that explains a lot of the other actions around the different strategies. And with that, I think I'll finish up there. Thank you.
Or interaction, if you like to call it. Please state your name and organization before posting your questions or your comments.
Chris from SEI. Just had a question around how you handle the stakeholder engagement, especially when you're dealing with people like homeowners. I didn't really see too much of that explored. Do you want to go into a bit more detail?
Yeah, okay. Look, engagement, it's a hugely broad topic. So we do engagement at a very high level for major strategies, and that's a very different looking engagement than we do for the projects that we're doing on the ground. So at the high level, one of the things that we have implemented over time is a thing called City Talks. And these are public talks in the town hall. A couple of thousand people turn up. They're well advertised. We get international speakers and panels, and we talk, they're basically talks on particular relevant issues on sustainability or economic or social or cultural issues. And that's one way we do a high level engagement on those sort of things. With the strategy specifically, we then take a sort of staggered approach. So we do stakeholder engagement plans for every major project in the city. So we have a project management process in the city. So any project over $60,000 or any project that's cross-functional across the council has to go to an executive steering committee. As part of that, you have to have a stakeholder engagement plan for that. And so, look, I mean, it's a very, as I said, it's a very broad topic, but with a, say with, I actually didn't talk about it, but the energy efficiency master plan, that's one that we're developing now. And the reason we're doing it now is that when we started this process, a lot of energy efficiency was already being uptaken by many of the commercial buildings. So we're doing this now. And we know that we've got some experts in the industry. So what we've done for this one is that we've set up a stakeholder reference group, and we've invited 12 to 15 industry experts, and they're going to become a reference group all the way from the start of the project. So I've got them to review the scope of the project. I'm going to have a couple of them on the tender panel when we engage a consultant to help us. Then when the consultant comes in with the information, we're going to engage with them again. So we're actually really heavily involving them in the process all the way through, so that when the strategy comes out, we hope that that strategy will be well taken up and endorsed by the stakeholders. So that's one example. Tri-generation was a very different story. We trying to have a conversation about district energy in Australia was a really difficult thing probably a couple of years ago, because there wasn't a lot of knowledge and there wasn't a lot of expertise, and there was some strong opinions, probably not that well informed as well. So we actually took an approach to let's just do the work and do the analysis and really, spend the hours on getting the strategy right and bringing it to the surface. And so we took a very, we sort of brought it to the industry, then we had the conversation because we actually had something to discuss then. So it really depends on the topic and on the breadth of the issue, how we approach it. But, look, it's one of the major cornerstones of the platform of how the Lord Mayor has been re-elected. She's really well known and respected for her ability to engage, and that's look, she got re-elected once with an even bigger majority than she did previously, and then again a second time, again for the same reason. And so she's a very loved politician for mainly that reason, for her ability to engage. So it's an important part.
My name is Stephanie Richards, and I work at a consulting group here in Singapore. My question was regarding, it seems like you've made some really dramatic improvements in your the energy efficiency of your government buildings. Have you done any cost-benefit analysis to show how much cost savings you can achieve with your electricity bills as a result of the investments that you're making in your government buildings? And where can we find that if it's available?
Look, the energy efficiency we've done a couple of the journeys have made some major components. So the first, we started out doing our own projects. There was lots of low-hanging fruit. We engage a consultant to do an assessment of some of the buildings. We get a scope of works. We employ a design and construction company, and they come in and do some of those works. That got us about 80% efficiency, and that was probably the low-hanging fruit. We then decided, look, that's kind of getting beyond our expertise, and also we have a big enough portfolio to get economies of scale. So we then defined an output specification for an energy performance contract. So we said we wanted another 23% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions through energy efficiency across our portfolio. We put all our buildings in the portfolio. We just put the targets in the tender, and we went out to industry basically and got an energy performance contract. Those works that are happening have just been completed towards the end of last year, and we're now going through the monitoring and verification stage of those works. So we're taking different approaches. I would say that on the average across all of that, we have about a 6-year payback across that 6.5-year payback. That's probably the best indicator I can give you. And we are preparing more detailed information that we will have on our website soon. It's not there yet, of the whole, more detail about all the actions we undertook and the detailed economic analysis. Similarly with PV is probably a little longer. That's about 8-year payback. And the other one was the LED lights, and the LED lights is in the order of 7 to 8 years as well. So many of these sort of programs are in that kind of ballpark, 6 to 8 years.
Yeah.
And that's because, you know, some of the actions are really quick, they're 6-month paybacks and those kind of things. But we did take a portfolio approach because we wanted deeper cuts. And that's the trick when if you just pick off the low-hanging fruit, you pick out all the stuff that makes the more difficult things look more attractive if you were to put them all together in a portfolio and looked at them as a holistic problem.
I'm sorry, may I ask a follow-up question
Yeah.
related to that?